From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It is a blustery weekend in North and Central Alabama with snow, sleet, and ice, making it difficult for folks to get around on roads in a state not much built for winter weather. Governor Kay Ivey has declared a state of emergency in 37 counties and urged Alabamians to use caution if they have to be out and about. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has more on how the state is handling the winter storm.
Snow and ice blanketed parts of North Alabama this week. And while it was a needed snow day for some, it did disrupt daily routines and created dangerous conditions. State and local agencies sprang into action, ensuring resources and protocols were in place to handle the challenges.
So we're doing the things that we need to do, kind of establishing resources, putting protocols in place. That way when the storm hits, we're really in this execution phase.
State Health Officer Dr. Scott Harris emphasized the importance of caring for those in need during the storm, particularly those people exposed to the harsh conditions.
We have people that sometimes have to live in a shelter, or they live in more temporary housing. So folks that are going to be exposed to the outside that way, and particularly if they're more vulnerable health-wise, please check on those folks and make sure that they're taken care of.
The Alabama Emergency Management Agency worked closely with local counterparts to ensure resources were delivered where they were most needed. Lisa Castaldo is EMA's Executive Operations Officer.
As the local EMA directors and their teams identify needs or resource capabilities that they lack, then our role is then to help identify that resource and coordinate getting it to them and as quickly as possible to meet their need. So we're in continual communication with them.
We want to make sure that we've got people in places, that way when things happen, when the call goes out, we can respond in a timely manner.
And officials also want to point out that every time there is a severe weather event in the state, it helps them better prepare for the next time Mother Nature presents a challenge. Reporting for Capitol Journal, I'm Jeff Sanders.
Thank you, Jeff. All eyes are on Washington this week as the 119th Congress has convened and awaits the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump. Alabama's congressional delegation is always in the thick of things in Washington, D.C., and that will be no different this time around. There are some committee changes for some of our delegation. U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville will continue to serve on Armed Services, Agriculture, and Veterans Affairs, all important committees to Alabama, but he's also picking up a seat on the Special Committee on Aging, which serves as a focal point for discussion and debate on matters relating to older Americans. U.S. Senator Katie Britt will continue to serve on the Appropriations and Banking Committees, but this year will also take a seat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. That committee has jurisdiction over the Department of Justice, the FBI, Homeland Security, immigration policy, and much more. Perhaps most notably, it is the body charged with considering all Article III judicial nominations, from district and appellate courts to the Supreme Court. Over in the House, many committee assignments are still being considered, but there are a few changes to announce. Congresswoman Terry Sewell has been named the ranking member of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Oversight. That committee oversees tax, trade, Social Security, and Medicare. She's the first black woman to hold a leadership position on Ways and Means. And Congressman Dale Strong has become Alabama's newest appropriator. He's moving from the House Armed Services Committee to the House Committee on Appropriations, where he'll serve alongside veteran Alabama appropriator Congressman Robert Adderholt. Of course, Congressman Mike Rogers remains chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. We'll update you on any other committee changes as they develop. And some staff leadership updates within the delegation. Tuberville has named Jordan DeFusix as his new chief of staff, taking over for Mary Blanche Hackney, who will continue serving as chief counsel. Haley Wilson is Rogers' new chief of staff, replacing Chris Brinson, who is leaving the Hill for the Williams & Jensen lobbying firm. And Alabama's newest congressman, Shamari Figures, has named Tristan Brow as his chief of staff. Congrats to all. Alex Engel is APT's new Washington correspondent, covering the Alabama delegation from right there on Capitol Hill. She's off to a busy start on what was an active week in the nation's capital. Here's her report from D.C.
A line stretched outside the office door to welcome Shamari Figures as Alabama's newest congressman, representing the newly redrawn 2nd Congressional District.
Feeling great, feeling excited, blessed to be here, to have this opportunity.
January 3rd marked the first day for the 119th Congress and for Figures as the state's second Democrat on the Hill. He flipped the seat blue after the seat belonged to Republicans for most of the last 60 years. Before he took the oath of office, Figures' family, friends, and Alabama residents greeted him in his new office in the Cannon House office building.
This is humbling. It's humbling, and it's also, I think, reassuring of the work that has to be done and reassuring of the interests that are in the state of Alabama when you see people coming from a variety of sectors, a variety of industries, a variety of backgrounds, all coming to wish you well and to get to know you.
Senator Katie Britt also stopped by to welcome him to Alabama's delegation.
Hi, Shamari! Congratulations!
Britt says she looks forward to working with the new congressman on issues like the Mobile Port and Maxwell Air Force Base, despite their policy differences. Just down the hall, Congressman Robert Adderholt, representing Alabama's 4th District, was feeling optimistic about the start of the new Congress. Adderholt is Alabama's longest-serving active member of Congress.
It's exciting that when we get a Republican in the White House, having a Republican Senate and a Republican in the House of Representatives.
Adderholt says one of his main priorities this year will be the border.
That's something that resonates across America, blue and red states, and so I think border security will be something that I think you'll see dealt with very quickly in this new Congress.
Lawmakers got right to work on that. The House passed the Laken-Riley Act Tuesday as its first piece of legislation this year. Alabama's representatives voted unanimously for the bill, which would require ICE to detain undocumented immigrants who commit crimes such as theft or shoplifting. The bill is named after Laken-Riley, a Georgia nursing student who was killed by a Venezuelan man while jogging. In the Senate, Alabama Senator Katie Britt sponsored the bill.
Let's get this done for Laken. Let's get this done so no family has to deal with the unimaginable that her family has been through.
It passed a key hurdle Thursday with bipartisan support. Democrats are expected to offer amendments on it next week. Congressman Dale Strong of the 5th District says immigration and bringing Space Command to Huntsville will be his main focus.
Let's do what's right for national security. 21 categories evaluated and done on 2 different separate occasions. Both times they said Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama is best for national security. So I'll be doing everything I can to push that.
And all of Alabama's delegations say they are ready to get to work. Figure says he's grateful for the opportunity to represent the state.
Stepping out there on that floor is it's a moment where you get an opportunity to sort of take a few minutes to sit back and think about all that it took for you to get here. All the people that made the sacrifices for you, both presently in your life as well as those who crossed those bridges before you.
Figures also participated in a ceremonial swearing-in ceremony for the Congressional Black Caucus along with Congresswoman Terry Sewell. Next week on the Hill, Senate hearings will start to take place for Trump's picks for cabinet positions. Senator Marco Rubio will be one of the first for Secretary of State, among others. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Alex Engel, Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Alex. The certification of the November presidential election also happened on Monday. A joint session of the House and Senate certified the Electoral College win of Donald Trump. It happened quickly and without incident. Of course, that wasn't the case 4 years ago when a mob stormed the Capitol attempting to interrupt that certification. Some activists gathered in Huntsville this week to remember that dark day and reflect on moving the country in a more positive direction. Randy Scott reports.
Now, we're not saying that we need to dwell on it and wallow in it, but we must never forget what happened on that day.
Alabama's NAACP President Bernard Summerton remembers the day in 2021 that almost changed the United States.
4 years ago, we all remember watching on our TVs and social media what was happening in our nation capital, where we almost lost our democracy.
His organization is holding this meeting to observe that event from January of 2021, but it also helps citizens learn how to move this nation forward.
We must let America know, especially our young people know, that they're our future, and we don't want them to have to go through what happened 4 years ago.
Huntsville in the state of Alabama sits roughly 700 miles south-southwest of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Citizens here watch politics locally very closely. And with changes happening in the nation's capital over the last 4 years and coming up in 2025, they're keeping close tabs on what's going on.
My feelings about it are stronger today than they were 4 years ago, because half of our country said it's okay to be an insurrectionist. And what that speaks to for the future of our country, I don't know, but it scares me.
Frank Levy says it should be a teaching tool to help people make better decisions.
I think people are going to have to go dig deep within themselves and to discover what they feel is important to do going forward.
Huntsville-Madison NAACP President Mary Jones Moore says people have to value the vote for everyone to be equally represented.
We need to make sure we get out and vote and elect people that we know that are for us, for everyone, not just a certain group.
In Huntsville, Randy Scott, Capital Journal.
Thank you, Randy. We are just 4 weeks away from the start of the 2025 legislative session. Alabama Senate Democrats met in Montgomery this week for a pre-session roundup discussing their policy agenda going into February. Senate Minority Leader Bobby Singleton said his caucus is focused on important issues like education, healthcare, and economic growth.
We bring together different groups in the communities, from education to finance office, and today we're listening on the education side. This is a 2-day roundup. Yesterday we dealt more with the finance office, budgets, and things of that nature. Just trying to get where we are before we go back into session. And what we was doing was hearing from community-based people. What we were able to do was to be able to bring in legislation that we think that are being pre-filed and ask judges, and we'll ask DAs, and we'll ask school board members, how is this going to affect you if this law is passed? And so they were able to give us the kind of feedback that we need, what was good about the bill, what's bad about the bill, and how it would affect their agencies, which would give us an insight on whether or not we can support this legislation or not, or can we tweak it or give it an amendment.
Coming up after the break, I'll sit down with the next President Pro Tem of the Alabama Senate, Garlan Gudger, for a discussion about what to expect when he takes the helm in February. After that, House Minority Leader Anthony Daniels joins me to talk about his caucus's agenda and the looming debate about the overtime income tax cut. And later in the show, State Health Officer Dr. Scott Harris is in studio to talk about flu season, budget needs facing his department, and the new report showing the cancer risks associated with alcohol use. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is State Senator Garlan Gudger, the Republicans' nominee for Senate President Pro Tem of the Alabama Senate. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate being on the show.
All of that to say, in your title is, you're the next Pro Tem of the Alabama Senate. I know that there's a formal process that has to go through on the Senate floor, including with Democrats and everything, but your caucus has nominated you as the next Pro Tem of the Alabama Senate. It's a big deal, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm honored to be able to be this particular nominee from the Republican caucus. February 4th, if everything goes well and the Democratic caucus joins in and wants me to be their Pro Tem, then I'll be sworn in on that day, and then we'll get to work immediately right after that.
It's a big deal, and I'm curious, this is the first time our audience has really heard from you at length about this. What really made you want to step up and put your name in the hat for that role?
That's a great question. My life has been upside down and sideways and then back on top of the mountain in the last 6 months. You know, I've had an accident that was on the water with my son and on a Sea-Doo, and from that I was airlifted, had a lot of injuries from 8 vertebrae crushed to 7 ribs that were cracked, collapsed lung, my spleen artery was torn apart.
Goodness.
I didn't really have vision for 2 months. And it really made me think, okay, this happened in a blink of an eye. How am I going to transform the way I think and the way that my emotions are, and whatever I touch to make an impact for the most people I possibly can before I do die. And you know, at that moment when the accident did happen, I thought could have been the end of my life. And so I remember falling into the water after I got hit by the Sea-Doo and said, this could be it, you know. And the only thing that really mattered to me was my family and my friends and the loved ones that I had. So how do I transform that? Because God allowed me to stay here and do what I'm doing now. And how do I impact the most amount of people for a positive and the good that I can do? And so a door opened, and I was able to walk through that, which is President Pro Tem. And if it wouldn't have been for the accident, I'm not sure that I'd have went through that particular door, but it changed my mindset to say, what can I do to make this place a better place before I leave and leave a legacy? And I wanted to get more involved. I wanted to get my hands dirty in the process and make sure that we were able to do the best that we possibly can, not only for my district, but for the state of Alabama. And if you know anything about me, I really enjoy helping people, and that's how I get fulfilled. And so I said, I'm going to do this. And when I ran, the majority of the senators agreed with me and voted for me within that inner vote, and now I'm in this seat today. So that's really why I did it, but I'm thankful I'm here and honored, and I'm ready to go to work.
Making every day count.
That is correct.
Well, look, we've only had in the last 15 years, since Republicans took over in 2010, we've only had 2 Senate President Pro Tems. You had Del Marsh there for a while. You had Greg Reed there, who just stepped down. So we only really have 2 examples of how that job works. But you're your own person. Mm-hmm. So how will you chart your own course, your own leadership style? What can we expect from you as the leader of the Senate?
Well, if you know my past, I'm number one, a small business person, right? And I own a small business, my family has, and I took over in 1999. So this is my 26 years of owning a small business. And so I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I want to get things done. I want to make decisions and move fast. And then at the same time, in the Senate, and with my 14 years prior to the Senate, was on city council, 10 of those years, the last decade as a city council president, handling the budget and all of the different departments. It makes you realize you can't make decisions too fast in government. You have to make sure that you're very diligent and thoughtful on the process, and there is a process that has to go in place because there's laws that you have to abide by. So there's a mixture between the first 2 pro tems that I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of that, from an entrepreneurial spirit that really want to get things done to making sure that we're going to be very diligent in our mindset of how we're going to handle this. And I think it's a good combination of both of those. So I would say with more communication, more transparency, but at the same time with my past experience, I think I'm going to chart a new course in my own direction for the Alabama State Senate.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've got 34 other people, to say nothing of lobbyists, staff, and everything else. Just talk about the body. 34 other, members of that Senate body that are going to come to you. Mm-hmm. Hey, I need this for my district. I need this for, I'm sure that's been kind of overwhelming just since you got the nomination. But how do you handle that? Because as you kind of alluded to, it's not majority leader. It's not just one caucus. You've got to be pro tem for the whole body. So how do you balance that, knowing that, man, everybody's going to be coming to you for all kinds of things that they need?
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I used to look at the circus when I was a child, and you had a guy that was holding plates, and they were spinning, and he had one on his leg, one on his leg. Sometimes I feel that way, where we've got my family here, I've got my business here, I've got the politics here, I've got to be a husband here, and I've got to be a father here. But I've never known anything different than that. I think God gave me certain attributes to be able to handle those spinning plates, and I look forward to it. We were talking earlier today with my chief of staff, and I like the intensity of it. I like the fast pace of it, and I want to make sure that I protect, and I also want to make sure that I do the right thing for my colleagues that do come to me and ask me for help. At the same time, what is important for them in their districts? They're the ones that were elected. They're the ones that are in charge of 150,000 people in their district. And if something's important to them, it's important to me. And so I've really had to put my issues to the side and my bills that I was going to pre-file to the side and really focus on the people that are those other 34 members of the colleagues in the Alabama State Senate. And I'm excited about being able to help them in their districts, because all that does is bring us closer as a team in the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about some of those issues that we might see come up. Mm-hmm. Session is in less than a month. It'll be here before we know it. We kind of lose that time over the holidays thinking it'll be here before you know it. What are some of those issues that you think, either as a caucus or just as a Senate in general, you think are going to come up are going to be the top ones in the session?
Well, first of all, I'm excited about the session coming up. Right, it's going to be my first session if everything goes well, as we talked about, to be the pro tem and to be able to cast a vision of where I want to go and chart that new territory. But as far as my colleagues and from what I'm understanding from them, there's a lot of economic development bills that they would like to see be coming up, and usually that's a package that comes through the governor's office and the Department of Commerce. But there'll be some of those bills that'll be coming our way. Number two, you're going to see some mental health bills, I believe, and funding for mental health that is going to be coming up, in substance abuse programs. And I don't know if you know this, but I just found out the other day there's not a long-term substance abuse facility in the state of Alabama, which is a shame, And so I want to be able to help with that and bring that to the people of Alabama if they need that, because so many people are dealing with that throughout the whole state. And then, the other issue is that you start looking at the federal government and what's President Trump going to do when he takes his administration over. And in his transition, he keeps talking about immigration. I think that Alabama needs to do their part on the immigration reform, and I think we will be having some of those bills coming up pretty quick as soon as we open up session in February 4th.
We had several of your members go to the border, I guess last summer sometime. We had them on the show, and they said, yeah, we wanted to go to the Texas border to kind of see the problem there. But when you do have such a problem, their argument was every state kind of becomes a border state with so many in the country, and what can be done. At the same time, a lot of that was attempted back in 2011, right, with the hardest immigration laws in the country and everything. A lot of that got scaled back. Do you think that the legislature can do work on immigration with also not going too far so as to violate federal law and be in trouble with the courts?
I think we have to, and I think we have to work with the federal government to make sure that we don't overstep or duplicate services that they've already put in place. Our job is to make sure what is best for Alabama, and as we say, all states are a border state now, because it's been so long and so many people have crossed the border. Obviously, they're throughout the state of Alabama. How do we protect the citizens of Alabama? How do we make sure that the right people are here and that the nonviolent criminals are still here? Obviously, we want the right people that have went through the immigration process and got their work visas or green cards to be able to stay here. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about illegal immigration. And so from that, I think you're going to see reform for the right purposes and to make sure that we take care of the right people getting out of our state to help protect the citizens of Alabama.
Interesting that you brought up mental health as well. Mm-hmm. There's this steering committee that's out there focused on especially mental health for veterans and how to streamline services there, understanding that that's a different population, a special population with special certain needs. So do you see that folding into what your goals are on mental health? Is it all kind of combined?
You have to be able to combine that together, for the fact of, first of all, our veterans have seen things that most of the other people have not seen in this, and we're here and have our freedom because of them. So we need to make sure that our tax dollars go to help them for the rest of their lives. They have got PTSD, and I was proud to be able to bring for 3 years straight through the general fund a pilot program for any first responder, for any veteran, for anyone in the sheriff and police department, fire departments, volunteers, that were able to have anything that they saw through trauma on a wreck or anything that they experienced, they were able to go get that shot that was at in St. Vincent's Hospital that would ease their pain, and they would be able to get back to a normal way of life, to hold down a job, take care of their family, and be able to provide for them so that they didn't have to be stressed out all the time with PTSD. That program has done very well. We took it from just my district to the North Alabama region, all the way to the whole state. And then from that is part, I think, of what this particular steering program is going to be based off of on the steering program that you were talking about for veterans. Now, rolling into that, you've got the opioid settlement committee chaired by Rex Reynolds. I think they're doing a great job spending around $10 million a year of opioid settlement money that we've gotten from pharmaceuticals. And then from that, we've got a total of about $275 million that we'll spend out approximately over the next 9 to 10 years. And that is going to treatment and prevention for substance abuse. And so I think all of that rolls under the umbrella of mental health. Not only the mental capacities for patients, schizophrenia is underneath that, but also the substance abuse and the issues that come along with substance abuse and mental health together under that umbrella.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's interesting in the last several years, the legislature has focused on it when it had been neglected. I think everybody can agree that it had been neglected for so long. Let me ask you the question that everybody asks me every time I say that the legislature is coming back to town, and they ask, what about gambling? So to put it in context here, just to lay the table out, Obviously, what happened last year, you saw the House really spearhead the effort, goes over to the Senate. You were involved in a lot of that, but it got dramatically scaled down, ultimately ended up not passing, which led a lot of the House members to say, look, we're not going to touch this year. But I don't know, the further we go along, I hear rumblings of maybe gambling could come back up. What are your thoughts about that? Do you see it coming up? And if so, what would its trajectory be?
You know, I would say from where I stand right now, and I've had multiple conversations with a lot of the different entities for and against gambling since I became President Pro Tem nominee from the Republican caucus. And right now, I don't think that it's a number one on my agenda by any means. I do think that there are people out there that would like to see it come up. And if we do, there's going to have to be conversations with the House that we have to see where they are. I'm not going to put my colleagues onto a vote if the House is not going to be able to reciprocate that vote and come up, and we need to have those conversations. That's number one. Number two is if it does come up, the illegal gaming that is out there is out of control. So that has to be a huge part of that, and the enforcement arm to be able to do asset forfeiture and to be able to come in so that someone is in control of that as far as regulation. Those two are the things that I think everyone agrees on. I think a lot of people want the right to be able to vote on the lottery if it does come up, and so my vote has always been to allow the people to vote, because we're not going to be the ones making the decision here, but if we do put it on the ballot, we need to put it so that people out all of our districts through the state of Alabama can vote. But from that, there are a lot of issues that the Alabama State Senate has to handle first. So until those conversations are had with the House, then I think that we're going to continue to stay focused on the issues at hand.
Mm-hmm. There you have it. I mean, that's about as succinct of answer as I think you're going to get on gambling, in terms of it's not out of the question, but if it has to climb some hurdles in order for that to come up in the legislature. Well, look, like you said, it's going to be here before we know it. I really appreciate your time. Good luck in your new role, if and when, and we look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for having me on the show.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is State Representative Anthony Daniels, Minority Leader for the Alabama House of Representatives. Mr. Leader, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Todd. It's been a long time.
I know. Happy New Year, all that. Are we still saying Happy New Year? I don't know how long that goes, but it's a treat to have you here. It has been a while, and I appreciate you making the time. I know that Democrats have been meeting over the last couple of days to try to get ahead of the session. I mean, goodness, we kind of lose track over the holidays of just how quickly the session is coming, but less than a month. So I wanted to ask you, with less than a month to go until session, what kind of general concepts, ideas are Democrats thinking about proposing for your agenda going into 2025?
Well, of course, Todd, healthcare is always the top of mind for Democrats, giving the plight and the status of a lot of hospital closures. Those hospitals are on the verge of closing. That's really negatively impacted the communities. Right here, east of here, Bullitt County, they had to have a reduction in force. I think about 90 people were laid off from the hospital there, and so that really impacts the town. It impacts the downtown area, the small businesses in the community. It impacts the overall economy in that community. And then you see it in Monroe County, where women are unable to have, bring life into this world because of the cuts that hospital have experienced, where the services have been eliminated there. And so you're beginning to see this play out throughout the state of Alabama, and even in Crenshaw County. They're having some challenges with their hospital there as well. And so healthcare is the top of mind. Economic growth and opportunity is always top of mind for us. We want to do more with helping and supporting small businesses. I think Innovate Alabama has done a tremendous job of helping startup companies, existing companies that are locating in the state of Alabama, and we're beginning to see them take off and really add more employees, which is what we want, growth and promoting growth, and then partnering with commerce. Secretary McNair, she's just a breath of fresh air. She's building on the successes that Canfield had when he was in that role, but she just kind of brings a different approach to it, focusing a little bit more on the rural communities and making certain that all boats are able to arrive. And so just really, I think it's a really exciting time, and I think that Canfield should be credited for the things that he did to really build the foundation, which puts us in a good position. But having someone in there that's really going to take the baton and continue to run with it and build on those successes, and you have the public and private sector all working together. And so you just really have a tremendous nucleus, especially on the economic side. I think that we're beginning to see public safety is a priority. What you see, you've been able to see some communities that are more affected than others. But that is not to say that other communities are not having issues regarding public safety. Mm-hmm. I think public safety is an issue all throughout the state of Alabama. It's not just isolated in certain areas, and just figuring out how do you deal with that and creating a balance. Because from a Democratic Republican standpoint, I think that all communities want to have safe communities. But how you arrive at getting to safe communities where there may be slight differences, but looking at research-based opportunities throughout the country and taking some successes from other places and figuring out how to implement it and make it fit the communities that we're in. And so we're just going to really focus on that and growth. And then on the education standpoint, we want to continue to see our children do well. We want to continue to close the achievement gap. We want to continue to promote innovation and opportunity. We want to make certain that communities, regardless of where you are in the state of Alabama, that your community have access to resources. And so we've been talking about, the task force has been talking about the school formula, the funding model, funding model. And I think that there's some merit there. I think that we just got to have more conversations about what that looked like. But at the end of the day, we're more interested in the return on investment and making certain that we're promoting progress and opportunity, and that we're able to also build a pipeline to where our students are better prepared than any students in America.
I want to ask you about the public safety part, because I'm hearing Republicans talk about that too, and there's two things I keep hearing. Number one is these task forces, right? That because some of our cities are having trouble recruiting police officers. They have a shortage, basically, of police officers. So like the state coming in to help, the feds coming in, the county, a task force to really kind of prop up the locals. There's been some examples of that, but maybe more policy and more funding for that. That's number one. Second thing I keep hearing, and this is a holdover from really a couple of years, is finally having a state law that prohibits Glock switches, the devices that turn a handgun into a machine gun. Almost got enacted last year, fell just short. Are those two things the Democrats you think would be on board with?
Oh, absolutely. I think that from the public safety standpoint, we want every community to be able to operate without fear. But we also got to focus on the preventative side. I think from the preventative side, when you listen to the words law enforcement, they're not preventing laws from bad things from happening. They're enforcing the laws. And so they're protecting the community where they deem necessary in areas that have had more issues than others. And so their task, they have a big task. But I think on the preventative side, we've not done enough. And the education, that's why the education piece is important, from birth to pre-K, and then focusing on in our middle schools, in our high schools, creating pathways for students to be able to look at things that interest them and have opportunities to go deeper into areas that they may not have thought about before. And so we want to create the environment within the communities on the preventative side so that crime is no longer an issue long term. But from a law enforcement standpoint, I also think that technology, you have some communities that have drones that's able to really zero in on an area where there's a shot or a crime that's being reported, to give law enforcement the intel on the ground before they get to the site. I think those are the type of things that where you're bringing technology and maybe incorporating some AI from an intelligence standpoint. We probably need some type of agency support to where there's a command center that really deploy these drones to help law enforcement before they get on the ground, and then look at some other things so that we're solving crimes and that people understand that you're not going to get it when you commit a crime, you're not going to get away with it. And then I think that looking at some stricter punishment on those individuals that are that are committing crimes that are necessarily crimes of moral turpitude or murder. You know, when a person takes someone's life, that should be taken serious, and they shouldn't be think that they're going to get, I'll go and do 3 years or 4 years or 5 years and get out. We have to send a message, and we have to send a message. We have to work with our judges. If there's a legislative fix to it, to where we give them more flexibility to do what they need to do and not tie their hands, then we need to look at that. It has to be comprehensive. But we got to focus on the preventative side, we got to focus on the intelligence side, and then we all have to talk to each other. There's no way that a sheriff office and a local municipal police force in the state and also the federal feds, FBI, and other agencies should not be communicating and coordinating. We're funding at different levels. We're funding all of these entities, but they're not talking to each other. They have to. This must be the standard practice moving forward all across the state of Alabama.
Yeah, definitely works better when they're all communicating. Okay, let's talk about a huge issue that's coming up this session, and it's all because of you. So in 2023, you authored a law that passed the legislature eliminating tax on overtime wages worked. It was a temporary thing, right? It had a sunset provision, meaning it was almost like an experiment because June of this year, it will expire, sunset. And that happens with a lot of first-time laws, right? And there's a reason for that. So if no action is taken, that tax cut, which is pretty popular, goes away. And so I would imagine that there are plans to revisit that thing. But the thing that makes it an issue is the costs are more in terms of revenue what was expected. You had some estimates. Now, all respect to the budget estimators, we had no way to, run the traps on this. This is a brand new concept, but it is the amount of revenue lost to the state, if you will, is a lot more than what we thought, in the $250 million range. So the table being set there, what do you plan to do in terms, because this is your law, this is your bill, what do you plan to do, and would it be a full, just putting it into law permanently, scaling it back? What are your plans?
Well, certainly going to want to do it permanently, but allowing this to sunset is essentially a 5% tax increase. So it's a tax increase if you do nothing. And so, but I think one of the dynamics that we really got to understand is that no different than the grocery tax. The 1 cent off the grocery tax from the state level, that's revenue that's not going to our coffers. Mm-hmm. The overtime bill going in the pocket of employees, those dollars are not going to the education budget.
It's not the state's money.
Yeah, it's not the state's money. And so the other thing that we got to look at, let's look at the impact for a second. Let's look at the impact that this legislation has had over our economy, right? Corporate tax receipts are up 13.65% from October 1 of last year to September 30th of this year.
So that's the fiscal year.
That's the fiscal year, 13.65%.
Wow.
$190 million new dollars as a result of productivity being up. How does productivity get up? Well, using your current workforce that's working overtime increases productivity for a business. If I'm responsible for getting 200,000 chickens out to my the individual I'm doing business with, and I need 100 more employees to get it done, but I'm using the existing workforce and I'm still hiring to get to 200,000. So therefore, my corporate tax receipts are increased because I was able to meet that goal. Mm-hmm. And so next year, I'll add on another client. So therefore, every year that I'm able to reach my goal or exceed the goal, I'm able to add more capacity, which then drives up corporate tax receipts.
Okay, so you're saying that, okay, yeah, there's that $250 million number sitting out there in terms of revenue, income tax revenue, no longer coming to the state, but it's being made up for partly because of that corporate income tax. I would imagine some sales tax too, because if people have more money in their pockets, they're probably, are there any numbers on that?
There are $10.3 million just for the state portion. And then there's $14 million for the city and county. But the other factor is, so then you add that up, you're talking about you're talking about $200 and some million, right? Then you add in the 43,000 new employees. So the workforce participation rate has increased. Oh, well, what does the overtime bill have to do with that? Well, let me tell you what. The sectors that those individuals are going in, manufacturing, healthcare, utilities, transportation, all sectors that offer overtime. So you got 43,000 new employees. At 5%, they're being taxed on the first 40 hours. Average salary household income in Alabama is $60,000. That's $3,000 for those 43 individuals. Times 43,000 is $129 million. Okay. So you have $190 million in corporate tax receipts increase coming into the coffers. Then you're having $129 million new tax dollars coming in. That's already that's almost $80 more million more than we had last year. So the gaps are being filled by productivity, which is corporate tax receipts, $190 million, 43,000 new employees paying at least 5% in the first 40 hours, which is $129 million. Sales tax at $10 million in the states from the state coffers, which goes into the Education Trust Fund. Then you got $14 million that's going to counties and cities for their tax rate. So you're talking about an investment, you're talking about $230 million that return you over $300 and something million. So you're actually seeing a surplus in tax receipts as a result of the overtime bill. So you tell me, where do you invest $230 million and get over $80 million on top of that? Replacing that and then getting a profit of $80 million. Where do you do that at? I mean, David Bronner can't do it. Tell me somebody that invested $230 million and yielded $300 and some million.
Sounds like it's almost a rehearsal of your floor speech when you're going to be, bringing this legislation. It is super interesting though, and I've talked before about how, like you said, it's going to be perceived as a tax increase if not, whether that's fair or not, that's going to be out there. And I've talked about how it could actually be kind of baked into the economic development, workforce development platform. If you bring your company here, we don't tax overtime, and that could help your employees. I've got to move on though. We're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you. We've just had this huge election. The new Congress has taken office, and this week was really interesting because it was the first time they've voted on anything, and it was this immigration legislation that I think last year, or certainly a couple of years ago, I don't think you'd find many, if any, Democrats voting for it. You had 48 Democrats supporting a Republican immigration measure, including both of our delegation. I've always said that Alabama Democrats, by and large, are a lot more centrist than their national counterparts, especially the more left-leaning progressives. Do you see the results of this election maybe bringing that far left contingent of the national party more closer to where y'all have always been?
Well, when you get thumped, you begin to reassess things. It's no different than having a football team. You're used to winning, and then all of a sudden you get taken out by a lot. And so then you have to reassess what you're doing. We've been saying for years in Alabama, our Alabama Democrats have been every business incentive to get companies into the state of Alabama, all reasonable pieces of legislation that we've pushed. We've always been pro-growth. But it's just from a national perspective, the tenor of the national party just haven't been where we've always been. And so I hope that because of what happened in the previous election, that we'll start really beginning to understand the big picture. If economically families are hurting and we don't see inflation going back to pre-2020 levels anytime soon, I don't think it'll ever go back. And so where families, they're needing more money in their pocket. And so this overtime bill is just one measure or the child care tax credit and other things. These are just measures that have actually put more money in the pockets of individuals. It's a balance between supporting business and employees, and it's a win-win situation for all families. And the Democratic Party nationally could only go back toward the middle a little bit to focus on issues that are going to impact the day-to-day lives of individuals. Now, we've been communicating, and I think they've done a great job of communicating, pushing certain pieces of legislation. But families, you have to lower the hay so the cows can eat. You got to make sure the average Alabamian or American to understand exactly what you are able to do to make their lives better and what you're going to do moving forward. And until the Democratic Party nationally start to realize that our focus has to be on people, not the noise, but people, and making certain that we're making an impact, then you're not going to see a very promising future.
So that's wise advice, and I think you are starting to see somewhat of a shift. We're out of time, but Leader Daniels, thanks again. Look forward to seeing you back in less than a month as the legislature convenes.
Well, can't you tell I can't wait?
None of us can. All right, stay warm.
All right, thanks.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Since 1997, Alabama Public Television has provided programs, services, and resources to child care professionals, teachers, and parents. Visit aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Dr. Scott Harris, Public Health Officer for the state of Alabama. Doc, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Good to see you.
I know it's been a while, but I really appreciate you making the time. I wanted to talk, we got a lot to talk about health-wise, but it is flu season. It's the season for respiratory illnesses and things like that. I wanted to get the latest on, how Alabama is faring on that and what advice you have for folks that are dealing with that or may deal with that in the coming months.
Yeah, flu season is definitely here. We are definitely in a full-fledged flu season. It's been really peaking since about the second week or so of December, second or third week of December. So we're almost a month into full-fledged season. We have a lot of information now that lets us track things like COVID infections as well as RSV infections, and we're seeing some of those as well. But flu is really the one that's leading the way right now. What we want people to remember is that flu is really a serious illness, particularly if you're older, if you have heart problems or lung problems or immune system problems, or if you're pregnant. Young, healthy women who are otherwise well but pregnant are really susceptible to flu. So if you're in any of those groups, or even if you're not, consider getting a flu shot, even if you haven't done it yet. Most people think, well, it's December, it's too late. It is definitely not too late, because we've got another several weeks of this for sure, if in normal years are any guide.
Mm-hmm. I think COVID did teach us about how to take things seriously, especially if you have those underlying conditions and things like that. Let me ask you this: it's cold out. I mean, we're frozen over in parts of the state right now, and it's a pretty cold winter. You wouldn't think that in a place like Alabama you'd be worried about keeping warm.
Yeah.
But that really is an issue. I mean, what would you say about the importance of keeping warm and avoiding hypothermia in these winter months?
Yeah, we really don't think about that as much. If what it's like here in Alabama in July and August, it never occurs that we could ever be
We're
cold.
talking about heat stroke.
Yeah,
right?
I know, incredible. But right now we're seeing as cold a weather as we're likely to see. So the meteorologists tell us. Just a reminder for people to use good common sense. There are a couple of things we worry about in this type of weather. One is just frostbite, and frostbite is when you have exposed skin in a really cold environment. So ears and nose and cheeks, sometimes fingers and toes. If you're outside for an extended period and you're feeling that burning and stinging, or those body parts are starting to really get really red, try to cover them up or get inside as soon as you can and warm up. But the really serious concern is hypothermia. That's when your body's core temperature drops too far. We usually say below 95 degrees as opposed to the normal 98.6 that we normally would be. When you get below that level of 95 degrees because you've been in the cold for too long, you start having trouble thinking. You get confused. Your actions sort of slow down. You might have uncontrollable shivering. You can see some discoloration of your body parts, particularly that are exposed to the cold. And that's truly a medical emergency. That's someone that needs to be brought to a warm environment as soon as possible, give them hot things to drink, wrap them up as in warm clothing. If they have any damp clothes or wet clothes, make sure you remove those as soon as possible. And think about getting them medical attention if you don't see them responding right away. There are a lot of folks that at risk for that you might not think. You know, we certainly have people who, you know, maybe are homeless, who are just out in those areas, of course. We see those people even in my own city. But you have people that just have inadequate housing. You know, people that don't have houses built for these days of January, or they don't have good heating. So think about your older neighbors or friends or family, maybe who don't have good clothing, who don't have a real weatherproofed house. Think about pets, you know, they may be kept outdoors most of the time. You really need to be mindful of them. And then, you know, think about people who are just working. Their normal jobs are, maybe they spend 8 hours a day outside doing, you know, whatever their job is. They're really at risk right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw the workers on the State House. They were working over, you know, into the night last night.
Oh,
and
man.
A pretty cold night.
That's amazing.
I wanted to ask you about this interesting story that has emerged about alcohol. A report came out, and the Surgeon General of the United States has, you know, put out a statement and everything talking about new findings on the use of alcohol and cancer risk. It was fascinating to me because, I mean, obviously with tobacco, we know that there's a cancer risk. If you pick up a pack of cigarettes, I think everybody knows that there's a cancer risk to that. I don't think the population at large was really aware of cancer risk when it comes to alcohol. So I found this fascinating. I wanted to ask you about this. Is this new? Is this emerging? And what can you tell us about alcohol use as it relates to cancer risk?
Sure. So I think most people in the medical world understand that alcohol in any amount really can increase your cancer risk somewhat. What's new about this study is that the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, really just consolidated all the evidence kind of in one place and laid it out there so that the public can see that alcohol contributes to the development of at least 7 or 8 different cancers. You know, some of them you might expect, cancers of the oral cavity, the esophagus, you know, the larynx or pharynx, the liver, you know, is not too surprising. But also we see that alcohol intake can raise the risk of breast cancer in women or in colorectal cancer in men and women. And most people probably don't recognize that. There's no question that the more you drink, the more your risk. So the more you're at risk. So people that are very heavy drinkers, drinking more than say two full-size drinks a day, are going to have an elevated risk. But probably you have some risk that's increased at any level of drinking. So even people who drink moderately, you know, drink 1 drink a day or you know, 1 drink a few times a week, probably do have some increased risk. So it's just another piece of information to people to be aware of so they can make their health decision.
Yeah, and just in time for dry January,
yeah,
right?
I know, yeah. What a bummer, right?
Well, I mean, I found it really good information, and we can put more information online. Well, before I let you go, we have legislative session coming up, and you run a state agency that you're, just like everybody else, going to be making requests of the legislature. What are some of the things we can expect in terms of budgets and policy that affect your space and public health in this legislative session?
Our biggest priority right now in our meetings with the budget chairs and other legislators and the governor's office has to do with the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, or what we call in Alabama All Kids. Mm-hmm. All Kids, as you know, is a great insurance program for low-income families, for the children in low-income families. It's a level of income that's a little bit above the Medicaid income, so it's sort of that next range of income. And these are typically just working families who maybe just don't make enough to pay for insurance. Because of some federal rules during the pandemic, we saw our CHIP numbers decline quite a bit. And the reason for that is that in any given year, kids may cycle either from CHIP to Medicaid or Medicaid to CHIP, depending on, you know, a few dollars difference in their family's income. This year they're on CHIP, next year they only make enough for Medicaid. But during the pandemic, anyone who went to Medicaid for any reason was required to stay there. State Medicaid agencies weren't allowed to disenroll anybody who landed there. So our CHIP numbers, our CHIP enrollment in Alabama fell by almost 30,000 kids, below what our normal average would be, because a lot of those kids just rocked over to Medicaid, and they were there until the end of the public health emergency. So Medicaid has been disenrolling those kids, over the past year. They've been finished with
the unwinding
period that you've heard so much about. They've been done with that now for almost a year now. But those kids are just now coming back to CHIP, many of them, and so in making our request for next year's budget, for fiscal 26, we've got 30,000 new kids, as opposed to that flat, stable number we typically have. So the legislature's been very supportive of the program. It's very popular with families. Kids have families have copays, and they have deductibles, and have some skin in the game. It's the perfect example of how a government-operated program ought to work, so we feel good about the support that we've gotten when we've gone and talked to legislators about funding it again.
Yeah. All right, we'll look forward to that during session. Dr. Harris, thanks again for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Todd. Good to be here.
We'll be right back.
Originally designated as a postal route in 1806, the old federal road stretched through the Creek Indian Territory of Lower Alabama. Alabama's federal road functioned as a major thoroughfare for western migration into the Old Southwest, ushering in a new era of national expansion and exploitation of Native American territory. Although much of the federal road has disappeared, portions of it remain today.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.